Hello all, welcome to DTKSS. In this session, we are going to discuss how to build web APIs using GitHub Copilot. So for that, I have selected ASP.NET Core Web API template and click on next button, and I will give that build web API using GitHub chart. So now I'm selecting .NET Framework 8.0 and click on the create button. So the project template has been created. Now you can see the project template is the default project template contains only one folder with the naming convention is controllers, and in that contains the weather forecast controller.cs, and also it contains the app settings.json, and also it contains the program.cs and weather forecast.cs. So this is the files which is generated with default project template. Now in this project template, what I want to do here is I want to build a school management project template or school management APIs authenticated by JWT token. So I'm going to use this GitHub Copilot chart extension. So this GitHub Copilot chart extension is a chart interface that let you interact with GitHub Copilot, and you can ask a question related to coding and it will give you a response based on your question. So how you can add this GitHub Copilot chart is similar to how we have been added GitHub Copilot in your previous video. We need to go to extensions and click on manage extensions, and here you can search for GitHub Copilot chart. So it will list you the GitHub Copilot chart. Since I already installed, it is showing a green icon. Now you can able to go to the install, and you can able to see a buttons called disable or uninstall. If you once you install this particular GitHub Copilot chart interface, then you will get a menu called GitHub Copilot chart. So I have been added here in the left tab. Now I'll just post a question to the GitHub Copilot chart. Create a model with or create a model class name student with properties student ID name, or I will use the first name last name and DOB and fees. So when I post a question, see the GitHub is giving a response to me here, a sample C# model class for the student. Very simple. When you write a question in a natural language, the GitHub Copilot chart is analyzing what you are asking the question, and it is generating the response what you require. So for that, I'm just copying this particular response what it was generated by GitHub Copilot chart. I'm going to Solution Explorer, and here I'll create a folder name called models. Under models folder, I will add the class what it was generated the code. So I will add a class called students. Then I'll go to the GitHub Copilot chart and just copy this particular code what it was generated, and I will copy paste here. Now you will see that 5 properties what I have asked GitHub to generate is 5 properties: student ID, first name, last name, DOB and fees. It was generated for me exactly what I was needed. So which makes very simplify the developers responsibilities using of this GitHub Copilot. Perfect. Now what we have to do here is, based on this model class, whatever the properties contains under this model class, I want to generate a controller and DB context class to interact with database and give a response using the student controller. So I'm going to write a question that create a controller using students model and generate actions get and post to save students data, and also generate dp context class to save student data. Perfect. So when I enter this particular command, so it is already started generating the code for me what it is required. Perfect. So this is the code what I want to generate here. So I'll just copy this particular code and go to the controller. Now what I want to do here is, I want to create a controller, student controller class, and I want to generate 2 action methods. One is http get and http post. Perfect. So this is what I have asked to generate get and post methods to save the student data. So I'm going to create a controllers, and I'll choose the API controller and empty controller, and I will give the naming convention is students controller.cs. Now what I will do, I'll go to the GitHub Copilot chart. I'll copy this entire class and paste here. So there is a error is to school context class is not found. So it is already suggested by GitHub chart, Copilot chart. So what I want to do here is I will just copy and go to the solution explorer, and I will create a new folder, and I will create this as a data. So why I'm creating all these folders is I want to separate each section. That's the reason I'm creating a separate folders. Otherwise you can create all these things into under solution itself. So now what I'm doing here is I'm going to create a new class and call it as a, what is the name of that, school context. Perfect. So I'll go to this particular chart and I'll copy the code and replace here, and I'll just add whatever the missing parameters. I'll just references here. Perfect. So all the missing references been added here. Now here also you need to add that whatever the namespace, sorry, this particular reference is required to add, you need to add here. So we have already added this data. So this data folder contains the school context, and this particular school context we are passing the object through the controller constructor. So now what I want to do here is I'll just fix this reference issue. So now what I want to do here is we are just passing this particular school context object into the controller, but we did not generated a dependency for this dependency injection for this school context. So we need to generate dependency injection. We need to register this particular school context into the dependency DI. So for that, I'll go to this GitHub Copilot chart and I will enter add school context class dependency injection and generate connection string in app settings.json. So now it is generating whatever the code is required to add the dependency injection to this school context, and how we can generate a connection string to establish the database connection using this school context. So for that, what I'm doing here is I'll just copy this particular code, and it was suggesting me where I need to add this particular code. So I'll go to the program.cs. Here I will add builder.services. So I'll just replace as per my format, and also here we need to do the same builder.services and use SQL Server. So this particular method is showing the error missing because of missing the reference. So I'm going to find, if you don't know what NuGet package is required to resolve this particular error is, you can go to the GitHub Copilot chart and you can post a question. Use SQL Server method NuGet. So it will give you a suggestion. What it is required is you need to install this particular Microsoft Entity Framework Core.sql. So this particular NuGet package contains this use SQL Server method. So what you need to do here is you need to go to the package manager console and install whatever the required NuGet package. Perfect. So once you install the package, you need to add that particular reference. Then here also it is expecting, what it was expecting is it is trying to read the connection string what we are going to add in the app settings. So first I will go to the GitHub Copilot chart and I will add this particular property here. So I'm going to add this connection string. So I want to read this connection string in the program.cs. So it is trying to read it and it is expecting some reference. So I'm going to add that builder.configuration get connection string. Perfect. Now we have been added that particular generating the school context object, and that particular object, whatever the object is here, we are injecting into this student's controller. So we can use this particular context object to interact with the database. Perfect. So now what I want to do here is, after generating the DB context, I want to generate the DB based on this particular model. Whatever the model we have created, based on these particular properties, I want to generate the DB. So for that, this DB is already exists. So that's the reason I'm just renaming school DB 12. So we need to execute the entity framework migration commands. If you are not sure what is the entity framework migration commands, you can ask the GitHub Copilot chart entity framework migration comments. So when you type this particular text, it is providing us the what is the comments are required you need to when you are migrating your model class into the database. So it is suggesting first statement is add new migration. So what it is required here is go to the package manager console and type add migration, and I will add a comment is my initial migration. So when I click enter this, so it returned me an error that the term add migration is not recognized. So for that, what you need to do here is you need to enter the comment, and this GitHub Copilot chart will give you an idea what NuGet package was missing to resolve this particular error. So what it was suggesting to us is we need to install this particular NuGet package to execute this migration command. So for that, I am installing this command, whatever the NuGet package is required, I'm installing, and I will re-execute that whatever the migration command is there, add hyphen migration, and this is our command. So this is the custom one. You can give any command. So now what will happen when you click on add migration, the project build is started, and once build is succeeded, then you can able to see a new folder might be added into this particular project template, and which contains the a file called initial migration.cs. So from where it got this name is whatever the comment I was entered here when I'm migrating, using that comment it was generated a class. In this particular class contains the a comments to create the student table, and there is a up and down, so two methods is there. When you run this particular up method, it will create a table, and when you run this particular down method, it will drop the table. Perfect. So now if this particular changes just generated, but these changes not yet applied to the database table. So what it is required to apply the database is you need to execute a command called update the database. Update the database. So you need to go to the package manager console, then execute a command called update database. Hyphen database. So the build is started. So and it is trying to execute whatever this particular code is generated, it trying to execute, and it has encountered an error. So what is this error is only the invariant culture is supported in global variant mode. So this is the framework error. So for that, what you want to fix this particular error is you need to right click on the solution, edit the project file. So invariant globalization, you need to set this false, and then you run this particular command. So now it will generate the database table successfully. So now the database is created successfully. So I'm just repeating the steps what we have done until now is we have created a model class called student. Using this model class, I have been generated a controller class which contains the two methods. One is HTTP get to get the student records, and HTTP post to save or to post the data into the database table. So how these particular methods, whatever the get method or post method is interacting with the database using the school context class. So this particular context class will help to interact with the database and loads the data, this DB set, and to show the data at the end user, or whatever the end user sending the student data will insert it into the database. Perfect. So until now we have finished the creation of two methods, that is HTTP get and HTTP post methods, to save and get the student data. So run and check to ensure that there is no errors. Whatever code we have generated using the GitHub Copilot chart is having no errors. So now it is not showing whatever the APIs which we created, it was not showing. Why it was not showing here is it does not contains the, I'll show you why. Weather forecast API controller is showing the APIs, and here why it was not showing here is we need to indicate that particular whatever the controller class we have generated, we need to indicate to the runtime these are all the API controllers which we need to show at the Swagger page. Now we already added this particular controller and rerun this particular solution. Now you can able to see three APIs which is belongs to two, student is two, one is for the weather forecast. Perfect. Now you can able to see that. So now I want to try this post. I want to post or I want to create a new student record. So for that, I'm going to give a naming convention is D2KSS GIT, and I will give the fees is 10,000 and click on execute. So when I click execute, so the API has been run successfully and the first record has been generated. Now you can able to see student ID. This is the primary key which is generating automatically, and this is the first name, last name, and DOB, and the fees I have given as input, and I got response same with the HTTP 201. So now I want to execute this get method to ensure that whatever I have created using the post method, whether I can able to see using this get method or not. So try, so execute that particular one. Now you can able to see whatever we have posted through post method, that particular response has been received here. Perfect. So that is what we have developed, the get and post methods. But these APIs, whatever the APIs which we have generated here is not authenticated APIs. But now what I want to do here is I want to make authenticated JW2 authenticated by JW2 token by these two APIs. So how I can implement it or how can add the authentication to these two APIs is go back to the solution. Now I'll go to the GitHub Copilot chart and I will add a comment is generate API or create a API to generate the JW token. So now it is started giving me the suggestions. So this is the API which helps to generate the JWT token. Perfect. So now it was generated a complete code to me. So what this particular code is indicating is we have to create a new controller called token controller, and this particular token controller having a post method which will takes the object of users. What users class contains these two properties called username and password. So using this username and password, your token will generate here, and you can validate the token based on the input parameters you have provided. So now I'll go back to the solution explorer, and here I'll create a one more controller and API controller, and I will choose this as a token controller .cs. Then I'll go to GitHub Copilot chart, and I will copy the methods what it was being generated here. So it is missing this particular user class. So I'll go to the GitHub Copilot chart, and I will copy the whatever the class is missing here. I'll just copy here itself. General practice, you can create under model, you can create this user class. Perfect. Now all the errors been resolved, and we can see here it was telling issuer, audience, and claims, and expiry, and signing credentials. So two things I want to see here is I'm going to remove this particular issuer and audience. So since why I want to remove these two properties is I don't want to restrict issuer or audience this particular JW token. So I'll just taken for a general example, and also it is expecting the 256 byte secret. So I will call this as a this is JWT authentication key using in GitHub Copilot chart. Perfect. So now I will rerun this particular solution and will verify that whether I'm getting this particular token or not. So now Swagger page has displayed student 2 APIs, token 1 API, and weather forecast is 1 API. So I'll run this particular token API. So here it is required what is the parameters I have been configured here is admin and password. Perfect. So I need to configure this as admin, password, and execute. Perfect. Now I got the token here already. But how I can make these particular two APIs are authenticated? I want to use this particular token to authenticate these two APIs. So how we can authenticate is go back to the solution and stop this solution. Then apply JWT token to student controller APIs and validate the token. So how we can authenticate is you need to add the attribute called authorize to the school controller APIs. So if you want to authenticate all the APIs under the student controller, you can apply to the class. If you want to apply to the specific API, then you can apply on top of that particular method. Perfect. So now what we have to do, we will go to the GitHub Copilot chart, validate the JWT token code is missing. So because it was not generated the code, how we can validate? Once we pass the parameter, the token parameter, we are not validating here. So how we can validate that? So this is the code, this is the particular code we want to add at this configure services exist under the program.cs, and you need to add this add app.authentication to apply these authorized changes. Perfect. So I'm just going to configure the code. So this is the code we are going to use it to authenticate these two APIs. I'll just explain here what is this particular code is doing. Go to the program.cs. Under here, you can add this code, whatever the code is generated here, builder.services, add authentication, JWT default. So install that particular package, what it was required here. And here also it is required to add the identity model tokens. And here you need to add system.text. So we need to cross check that what we have been generated in the token controller UTF-8. So here also in programs.cs UTF-8, and we need to use the same key, whatever the key which we are generating to validate that particular token, we need to use the same key. Perfect. So we need to go to the program.cs and we need to pass the same key, otherwise you will get 401 unauthorized access. Perfect. So now what we are doing here is add the controllers. So this particular code is already there. I'll just remove it. So in this particular code, whatever the code we have generated here to add the authentication, what is it was doing is validate the issuer, validate the audience, validate the lifetime, and validate the sign-in key. And when you are validating, which domain or which audience you need to validate. As I mentioned in your previous class when we created this token controller, I don't want to validate or I don't want to restrict my token to the specific user. So that's the reason what I'm doing here is I'll just put this validate issuer is false. So I don't want to validate the issuer or I don't want to validate the uh, audience, and lifetime also I don't want to validate. Since I made these two properties are false, I no need of any of these two properties, because when you are validating the issuer or audience, you need to have these particular properties, otherwise you no need to be placed in that particular properties. Perfect. So these are all the, so in this example what I'm doing is I'm just validating the issuer sign in key only. Perfect. So now run this particular application and check whether these particular student APIs are being authenticated or not. But here when I try to execute here, it is giving me the response status is 401. But since this is a get API, I cannot pass any headers explicitly in Swagger. When we are using the Swagger page, you cannot pass that. How you can do is you need to create a button called authorize button. In that authorize button, you need to pass this token, whatever the token being generated in API token. That particular, when you pass that, when you are running any API, it will authenticate it using the token which you are added here. So for that, I want to add that authorize button in the Swagger page. So I'll go to the GitHub Copilot chart and ask that add authorize button in Swagger page. Perfect. The code has been generated here. So this particular code will help to add the authorize button at the Swagger page. So I'm going to program.cs, and this particular method I'm going to replace here with this particular method. So in this particular method we are adding the security definition. So this token, this particular APIs to be validated with the JWT token, and the type of that token to be validated is bearer. So now you rerun this particular program. Now you can able to see authorize button. So this particular service add swagger gen, and in that we have added a security definitions how this token get validated. Using this particular code will help us to validate the token. I mean, when you can able to add the token into the authorize button, and using this particular add authentication method you can validate the token. So now what I want to do here is I'll go to this API slash token username. I'm going to give admin. So and password is password and execute. So now the token being generated, I'll just copy this JWT to token and go back to the authorize button. So this is a bearer button. So I need pass this particular thing and click on authorize. So now you run this particular student API. You are getting the response. You will notice that in this get API, there is a header which we are passing here is automatically. What we did not pass to this particular method explicitly. When you are authorized using at this swagger button, that particular parameter being automatically included at these authenticated APIs, and it will help to authorize or authenticated that particular methods and provide the response. For example, you just click logout, so meaning that you are not passing any token. Now click on this particular get token and execute. Now we'll get a response is error, response status equal to 401. So meaning that this particular API is expecting a token to be validated to return the response. So we have achieved this authenticated APIs without writing ourselves any line of the code, meaning that I did not write any code myself, and I have asked the GitHub Copilot to suggest me if I want to generate a authenticated API, what's the code is required. So whatever the GitHub Copilot has been generated, I copied into my solution and run that, and I achieve what I required. So it will make easy to the developer when they are writing the code. It will give you the response. But majority of people has posted me into my email that whether this GitHub Copilot or GitHub Copilot chat or extension, all these GitHub Copilot extensions are going to replace the human. No, my answer is no. Why? Because of GitHub Copilot is a trained AI model to help to the developer. But here one thing you must remember that whatever the code is suggested by GitHub Copilot might be following the higher standards or may not. So the developer need to ensure to accept the code whatever the GitHub Copilot is suggested to add into their solution. So GitHub Copilot very clearly mentioned in their portal that GitHub Copilot will not take any responsibility when they are suggesting any sample code. So the developer who is the expert adding that code or implementing the code need to ensure that that suggestion, whatever the GitHub Copilot given suggestion is higher standard and they can able to add into their particular code. So this is about build a authenticated API using the GitHub Copilot chart. Thank you.